Get out! The roar split the crimson Montana sunset like a blade. On the porch stood Silas Carter, once a shield, now a judge as cold as stone, casting his own daughter from the only home she had known. In Evelyn's arms lay Samuel, a frail Cherokee boy, newly motherless, branded now as the town's shame. Yet Evelyn did not weep. She lifted her chin, for she knew that one loving embrace was worth more than all the honor in the world. When the world turned its back, her choice became her strength. And from the dust, out rode Colt Harrington, the quiet cowboy, the first man to see in Evelyn not disgrace, but a mother brave enough to carve a home from the wild. The Montana sky burned a furious red, stretched wide across the endless prairie like a wound spilling across the horizon. The blazing sunset poured over the weathered porch of the house where Evelyn Carter had grown from a child into a woman. Yet now, beneath that light, the place she once called home felt foreign, as though the heavens themselves bore witness to a family torn apart. In Evelyn's arms lay a newborn child, swaddled in a threadbare blanket. Its frail breath trembled against her neck, a reminder that though the world had turned its back, this small life still clung on, still needed someone to hold it. She cradled the infant closer, as though clutching the last breath of her own. Her father, Silas Carter, loomed at the top of the porch steps. His shadow stretched across the cracked earth, mingling with the crimson sky until he seemed less a man and more a judge at a hanging. His eyes, once the wellspring of her pride and protection, now gleamed only with scorn and condemnation. His voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "No daughter of mine will raise the bastard of some Indian woman. Get out!" Each word struck Evelyn's chest like a hammer blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Never in her life had she defied her father. Since her mother's death, she had lived by his order, never missing a Sunday sermon, tending the sawmill work without complaint, guarding the family's honor as if it were sacred law. But now her heart no longer bowed to his decree. The child stirred weakly, releasing a faint whimper almost lost to the wind. Evelyn lowered her gaze, meeting the half-closed eyes, lashes trembling like reeds in the breeze. The baby was far too small, too fragile, to bear the cruelty of grown men. And in that instant, Evelyn knew she could not abandon him. "Father," her voice shook, though her eyes held steady. "The child is innocent. He needs someone to care for him." Silas's hands clenched behind his back, his shoulders rigid as timber posts. He did not answer, only turned his face aside as though even her gaze defiled him. His jaw flexed, the veins in his neck drawn tight. At last, his reply came, his voice low and solemn, a verdict laid down. "You've made your choice. Don't expect to come back here." The faintest ember of hope within Evelyn died at those words. Pain rose in her chest like a surging wave, but it did not break into tears. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. She drew the child tighter in her arms, lifted her chin. Silas's gaze flickered to the baby once more, hatred flashing. Then he turned and strode inside, slamming the heavy door shut. The sound echoed like a final judgment. Evelyn stood there, the prairie wind cutting against her, carrying with it the smell of smoke, of dry earth, and the distant cry of crows across the fields. It was a dirge of sorts, ushering her away from the only home she had ever known. She thought of evenings spent beside her mother, a gentle woman who sewed by the fire, humming simple songs. Back then, Silas too would sit nearby, stern-faced yet proud whenever Evelyn recited scripture. She once believed her father loved her with all he was. Now those memories lay shattered. replaced by the sight of a man willing to forsake his own flesh for the sake of pride. She stepped off the porch. Dust clung to her worn shoes at once. The coarse cloth bag on her shoulder dragged heavy, but it was nothing compared to the weight inside her chest. She walked on, though she knew not where, only that she could never return. The infant whimpered, a thin thread of sound in the vast silence. Evelyn soothed him, her heart clenched tight. His tiny hand reached out, brushing her neck, a fragile plea. Evelyn closed her eyes and swore a vow without words. I will not leave you, no matter what comes. The sun fell swift, stealing the light, leaving streaks of blood red stretched across the horizon. Darkness crept over the valley, swallowing the small town of Silver Creek. Windows glowed faintly gold, but doors stayed barred. Not one soul stepped out to her aid. They had heard. They had taken Silas's side, and they had chosen to remain silent. Her steps faltered but pressed forward. Her heart bled, yet within it burned a will she had never before known. The wind swept across the prairie, carrying the distant chime of a wind bell from some homestead far away. The sound rang like a farewell, bitter and unforgiving. Evelyn raised her eyes to the sky, where the last crimson streak lingered, a wound refusing to close. That night, upon the vast plain, a daughter cast out by her father stood 22 years old, an infant not her blood cradled against her chest, and within her a fire quietly flared to life, the fire of resolve, of love greater than judgment. She did not know how long the road ahead would be, nor how rugged. But she knew this, from this moment, her life was no longer the same, and in the cold bite of night, she pressed the child close, whispering into the dark, "We will go, Samuel. Though the world turns its back, we still have each other." 3 days earlier, as dusk fell over the Bitterroot Range, Evelyn had heard a faint sound at the porch. When she opened the door, she found a Cherokee woman collapsed on the steps, her dress torn and stiff with dried blood, her breath flickering like a dying ember. In her arms, she clutched a newborn boy, the cord not yet healed, his cries no more than broken gasps. Evelyn cried out for her father, Silas Carter, then knelt to lift the child. The mother opened her eyes one final time, clouded, yet pleading, and her lips trembled soundlessly. By the time the doctor arrived, the woman's breath had ceased, leaving only the frail infant writhing weakly in Evelyn's hands. They told Evelyn she was naive, that she ought not entangle herself with Indian folk. But the moment her hand rested on the baby's tiny chest, feeling that stuttering heartbeat, she knew she could not turn away. It was no longer a choice. It was instinct, the call of what others would name compassion. She gathered the child in her arms, whispering shaky words to soothe him. That night she did not sleep, cradling him through the long dark, humming the lullabies her mother once sang to her. His breath was fragile, his cries thin and piercing, yet with each sound Evelyn's resolve tightened. She would raise him, no matter the cost. By morning, word had swept through Silver Creek like wildfire. Few remembered the Cherokee woman's final moments, but all recalled seeing Evelyn carry the baby into her home. Whispers began in the saloon, drifted through the church, and spilled down the main street. "It's her own child. She's hiding it," some declared. "She's been with someone in secret. Now she lies, says she found it," others insisted. The gossip caught like dry tinder, devouring the honor Evelyn had carefully built. In the span of a day, the young woman once respected, who taught children their letters on Sunday evenings, had become a scandal, a source of shame. The next morning, when Evelyn carried the boy to the well, a neighbor woman, once her mother's friend, drew shut the window and pulled the curtain. By evening, when she stepped into the bakery for flour, the shopkeeper set the sack down without a word, no greeting, no warmth. Cold eyes followed her everywhere, not for what was spoken, but for what was left unsaid. At home, Silas Carter's fury thundered. He slammed his hand on the table, face red with rage. "The honor of this family is worth more than anything. You bring that into my house, you shame yourself beyond repair. Evelyn, you'll pay dearly for this folly." But Evelyn did not release the child. She only bent, pressing her lips to his brow, whispering, "Your mother is gone. I will not let you lose again." The words fell like a blade between her and her father. 3 days dragged longer than 3 years. Evelyn endured both the town's whispers and the watchful eyes of her father, whose presence grew colder by the hour at night. When all others slept, she sat by the cradle, listening to the baby's ragged breaths, afraid that each dawn might steal him away. In a town so small, rumor traveled fast. No one saw her in church again, for her own father, the elder, had barred her silently. The merchant wives who once spoke with her of books turned their faces aside. Even young men who once courted her now laughed openly, calling her a widow before the wedding. One morning, when Evelyn brought the baby to the doctor for medicine to ease his fever, the nurse shoved the vial across the counter, her voice sharp with disdain. "That child is no kin of yours. Why burden yourself with it?" Evelyn answered only with silence, carrying him out. But inside, her heart split raw. The price of compassion stood plain. Contempt, exile, abandonment, even her own father's rejection. Evelyn had lost her home, her safety, her good name. But in her arms, life stirred, a soul too innocent to be forsaken. And amid the storm of scorn, she felt something greater taking shape, a strength she had never known. That afternoon, as golden light spilled across the main street, Evelyn passed a group of women washing clothes by the creek. They paused, looked, and smirked. One muttered, "Maybe she's no different from its mother." The remark cut short when Evelyn lifted her head. Though her eyes brimmed with tears, they gleamed with steel. She did not reply. The way she tightened her hold on the child was answer enough. That night, lying on the old wooden bed, she heard her father's heavy steps pacing the porch, each one the tread of a jailer. She knew the day he would drive her out was close, and strangely, she did not tremble, for she had come to understand. Better to be branded in shame while keeping her humanity than to live sheltered in the hollow shell of false honor. The child nestled closer, breathing softly against her. Evelyn brushed a hand over his dark hair, whispering like a vow, "Though no one wants you, I do. Though no one chooses you, I choose you. And though I may lose everything, I will not lose you." Beyond the walls, the night sky burned with countless stars, cold, distant, unfeeling. Yet within Evelyn's arms, there glowed a small fire, enough to warm a heart cast out by the whole world. The days dragged heavy as stone. Since the moment Silas had slammed the wooden door shut, Evelyn lived like a shadow adrift in town. No one called her name anymore. Only murmurs trailed at her back. Each step she took with Samuel down the dust-choked main road drew cold stares. Doors closed as she passed. Whispers snuffed out mid-breath, leaving their bitter aftertaste in the wind. She tried Mrs. Gertrude's boarding house, once a refuge for weary travelers. But when Evelyn arrived with Samuel in her arms, Gertrude only shook her head. "Your father came by," she said softly, eyes cast to the ground. "He threatened to cut off lumber from the mill if I took you in." Evelyn stood for a long moment, chest tight, then simply nodded and turned away. She sought out distant kin, clinging to the hope that blood might stir mercy. But from the porch she heard the whisper, "Take her in and you invite ruin." The door stayed bolted. The small world of Silver Creek, where Evelyn had grown, had become a cage of iron. No way out. No hands open. That evening, she stopped at the general store to buy goat's milk. As she lingered, Samuel whimpered hoarsely in hunger. From the back stepped Mrs. Mallory. Past 50, widowed many years, round of figure. Her sleeves always carrying the scent of flour and soap. Her gaze settled on the infant in Evelyn's arms, and where others held scorn, her eyes carried only weary kindness. "Child," she murmured, pulling Evelyn into a quiet corner. "I've heard it all. What your father's done. No one dares say it aloud, but few reckon it's right." Evelyn bit her lip, voice caught. "I don't need their understanding. I just need a place where he'll be safe." Mrs. Mallory glanced about to be sure no one was listening, then bent close. "There's an old shack by the wood's edge on my sister's land. Been empty for years. It ain't much, but it has a roof, a well, and no one watching. Go tonight, before your father thinks of worse. I'll set a few things aside for you." Evelyn froze, every vein in her heart suddenly alight. In the darkness, those words were a lantern, dim but enough to show a path. She faltered, tears burning her throat. "I'll owe you my life." "Owe me nothing." Mrs. Mallory waved it off, her tone brisk though her eyes shone wet. "That baby needs warmth, and a girl like you needs ground to stand on. If the town turns its back, you'll have to find ground elsewhere." Evelyn pressed Samuel closer. The boy slept deep, his tiny fist curled tight around the fabric of her dress. Looking at him, courage welled in her veins. Fear fell away, leaving only a single need: to keep this child alive. Night fell thick with cloud, moonlight smothered. The general store shuttered earlier than usual. Behind its back door, Mrs. Mallory waited, holding a heavy sack, dry bread, a small jar of honey, a few packets of cornmeal, rolls of cloth. She added a woolen blanket, worn thin yet clean. "Take it. Nights will turn colder. And don't come back to town for a spell. Let the storm die down." Evelyn nodded, tears threatening to fall. For a fleeting instant, she felt her mother near, as though sending Mrs. Mallory to steady her. Together they slipped out the back. Samuel stirred faintly in sleep, his breath steadier in her warmth. The night wind swept dry grass and carried the call of owls from the woods. Evelyn lifted her gaze toward the dark ridge of pines where the shack lay. The road was not far, yet long enough to sever the last tie to town. Mrs. Mallory set her hand on Evelyn's shoulder, gave a firm squeeze. "Go now, girl. Don't waste breath on doors already closed. The new road may be hard, but at least it'll be yours." Evelyn gripped the sack, lifted Samuel close, and stepped into the night. Each stride felt heavy as stone, yet some quiet strength carried her forward. Whenever Samuel shifted, she whispered, "We'll have a roof soon, my boy." Behind her, Silver Creek slept on. Its windows glowed with lamplight, but no one knew a young woman was walking away, carrying the child no one wanted, and a fragile faith all her own. Ahead, The dirt path cut into the woods, a dark scar across the land. Evelyn did not stop. With each step, she left behind the whispers, the judgment, even the shadow of her father. In the silence of night, only her heartbeat remained, twined with Samuel's fragile breath. And in the midst of fear, something else rose within her. Hope, small as a spark, yet enough to guide them through the first night of their new journey. The cabin crouched in the shadows of tall pines, its roof blotched with leaks as if it had borne the weight of 100 winters. Evelyn Carter pushed open the groaning door. The stench of rotting timber and cold ashes spilled out, making her shiver. Yet inside, at least there was shelter. 4 walls, a battered table, and a stove scarred with use. In the harsh wilds of Montana, such things felt near a miracle. The child stirred in her arms, dark eyes fluttering open as if to ask whether this might be a place to rest. Evelyn laid him gently upon the sagging bed, its quilt thick with dust, and spread her own scarf beneath him. She whispered the name she had just chosen, Samuel. One word, soft but binding, like stitching a broken thread. It was the name of her younger brother, lost at 14 in a logging accident. In Samuel, she reclaimed a shadow of the boy she had loved, and for herself she found a reason to keep breathing. By dawn, when pale light spilled through the gaps, Evelyn set to work. The cabin, though decayed, still held a stubborn strength. She swept away leaves and cobwebs, stoked a fire in the stove. White smoke curled upward, a signal of beginning. A few old hens clucked in the yard as if protesting her intrusion. At the well, the water was icy but clear, enough to wash Samuel, enough to make her first thin pot of soup. While stacking wood beside the hearth, Evelyn noticed a gap in the bricks. Something urged her to pry them loose. Inside lay a moldy bundle of cloth. She opened it and froze. A rusted revolver, heavy in her hand, a few Mexican coins, and a scrap of yellowed paper. Scrawled in a hurried hand were the words, "Return to Harrington, debt unpaid." Her heart thundered. Harrington. The name was no stranger. One of the richest, most ruthless clans around Helena, known for mining, for smuggling liquor, for debts that were never settled in coin alone. Such debts were paid in blood. Evelyn dropped the gun, her hand trembling. The cabin was no random refuge. It had been a hideout once, perhaps for a fugitive who never returned. And now she, a woman cast out by her town, had stumbled into a place haunted by a debt that still lingered. That afternoon, with Samuel asleep, Evelyn sat at the window, watching the forest sway. The wind carried a distant howl. Fear coiled within her, but so too did a strange sense that fate had drawn her here, into some circle she could not escape. Returning to town was unthinkable. Only curses, locked doors, and her father's condemning eyes awaited there. Her only road lay here, clinging to this cabin, whatever shadows it might hold. For 3 days, she learned to survive. She lit fires for warmth, boiled eggs from the old hens, gathered berries along the tree line. Samuel cried deep into the night, but his cries kept the silence from devouring her. In that emptiness, the sound of a child tethered her to life. Then one noon, as she stacked wood, a stranger appeared in the yard. Tall, wrapped in a dust-stained coat, hat brim shadowing his face. He halted, staring at the smoke curling from her chimney. Evelyn's pulse raced. She clutched Samuel close, fingers inching toward the place where the revolver lay hidden. The man did not enter. He only gave the faintest curl of a smile, then turned and walked away, leaving boot prints deep in the damp earth. That night, Evelyn could not sleep. She knew the cabin's secret could not stay buried, and if the debt tied to Harrington blood, someone would surely return. In her fitful dreams, she saw again the Cherokee woman, chest bloodied, pressing the infant into her arms, whispering, "Protect him. He carries the curse and the hope." Evelyn jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Curse, or only her mind weaving shadows of fear. At dawn, she went to draw water. Carved into the well's stone rim was a single letter, H, cut deep, cut fresh. Evelyn stood still, heart stinging. Someone had found her. Someone wanted her to remember the Harrington debt was not yet done. And yet, beneath her fear, a new fire stirred. For the first time in her life, she felt she could no longer live as the preacher's obedient daughter. She had chosen the child. Now she must choose her own strength. If this cabin carried a bloody past, then she would write the next chapter, not to settle another man's debt, but to survive with Samuel. She cleaned the revolver, slid in the bullets, though her hands trembled. Firelight flickered across her face, catching the steel in her eyes. Outside, Montana stretched wild and merciless. But within the cabin, there was a mother, a child, and a secret yet unsettled. That long night, with the wind screaming through the cracks, Evelyn understood. The price of compassion did not end with rejection. It had only just begun. The first night in the cabin at the forest's edge was unlike any night Evelyn had ever known. Montana dropped a heavy shroud of mist, wrapping the tall pines in ghostly white, leaving the little shack stranded as if afloat in a sea of fog. Wind shrieked through the cracks in the timber walls, fanning the small fire in the old stove and casting shifting shadows that crept along the walls. Samuel cried without pause. His voice was weak but relentless, cutting through the silence of the wilderness. His small body burned with fever, skin flushed crimson. Evelyn held him close in trembling arms, rocking, weeping, sometimes pressing her forehead to his, begging silently for a miracle. Her tears dampened the fine down of his hair. No medicine, no one to ask. Only despair. Yet in the heart of that despair, Evelyn told herself, "You are a blessing, not a burden." The words slipped from her lips like a prayer. They became the cord that held her upright, that kept her from collapsing beneath the weight of the night. She shed her coat, wrapping it tighter around Samuel, then pressed him to her chest for warmth. His hot breath soaked her skin, every ragged sigh reminding her that his life rested in her hands. Evelyn remembered the moment 3 days before, when that tiny hand stirred inside a torn blanket and she laid her palm upon his chest to feel the stuttering beat. That frail rhythm had become her reason to live. Outside, an owl swept low across the roof, its hoarse call echoing like an omen. Evelyn shivered, but did not loosen her hold. In the wavering glow, her eyes shone with something new, resolve. The hours dragged, each one as long as a lifetime. Whenever Samuel's cries rose sharper, Evelyn sang softly, the lullabies her mother once sang over her crib. Her voice quavered, broken at times by sobs, but it carried on, steady as she could make it. Strangely, the trembling songs worked. The boy drifted in and out of restless sleep, breath still labored, but calmer. Toward dawn, when moonlight spilled silver through the door's broken seam, Samuel's fever broke. His breath grew steadier, his cries softened to faint whimpers. Evelyn pressed her lips to his brow and felt the sheen of sweat where fire had burned before. Relief washed over her, leaving her weak and trembling. In that moment, she saw the true cost of compassion. rejection, loneliness, torment through nights that felt endless. But she also understood she held in her arms something greater than every whispered curse, life itself. As dawn neared, Evelyn leaned against the wall, Samuel curled in her arms. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she dared not close her eyes. The fire had sunk to embers, glowing like watchful eyes. Half dreaming, her mind returned to the scrap of paper she had found behind the hearth. Return to Harrington. Debt unpaid. The words spun in her thoughts. Who was Harrington? What debt bound this cabin? And would it drag peril to her door? A sudden gust slammed the Hawson, rickety door open. Evelyn clutched Samuel tighter, heart racing. But outside there was only the forest and the cold, indifferent moon. Still, she felt it deep within her. This peace was only borrowed. The secrets buried in the cabin would not stay hidden for long. She bent and kissed Samuel's brow, whispering once more, "You are a blessing." Their first night passed, leaving her not only with fear, but with a strength she had never known. And as the first pale light crested the mountains, Evelyn understood. The road ahead would never be easy. But now she was no longer alone. The sound of hooves tore through the still morning like a warning bell. Evelyn clutched Samuel tighter, her heart hammering. For days, every stir in the woods had carried the terror that her father might appear, whip in hand, to drag her back to the church before the eyes of the town. But the figure rising through the red dust was not Silas Carter. It was another man. Colt Harrington. He sat tall on a black horse, broad-shouldered, steady in the saddle as if born to it. A cowboy of the Double R Ranch, the largest cattle spread in Montana, known not only for his skill with rope and gun, but for a family name tied to land, power, and debts that bled in blood. Evelyn remembered the scrap of paper from the hearth. Return to Harrington. Debt unpaid. That name made her arms tighten around the child instinctively. Colt swung down, tied his reins to a pine, and set a sack of fresh beef at her door. He spoke little, his voice low but firm. Double R sends meat for Widow Mallory. She told me to drop it by. His eyes flicked to the child, shivering in its blanket. Samuel wheezed, lips cracked. Evelyn pulled the cloth higher, bracing for the sneer, the spitting contempt she'd learned to expect. But Colt did neither. He simply studied the boy, then gave a small nod. "You did the right thing," he said, clipped as an order. "That boy's still breathing because of you." The words struck like a blade breaking through her armor. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks, not of shame, but because for the first time, someone had affirmed her choice. She bowed her head, voice trembling. "Thank you." Colt only shrugged, as if thanks were wasted breath. He placed a sack of salt and a bundle of dry wood beside the beef, then turned. But at the door, his hand brushed a mark carved into the wood, the crude letter H, the same as his family name. His eyes darkened, then cooled. "This cabin," he said slowly, "once belonged to someone in my family." Evelyn's chest seized. The paper in the wall blazed back in her memory. Those words, debt unpaid. She prayed he would not know. Colt's gaze lingered. Then he mounted up, leaving only a warning behind. "Some debts never sleep. Be careful in this place, Miss Carter." He spurred his horse, a plume of red dust curling like smoke from a signal fire. That night, Evelyn sat by the stove, listening to Samuel's hollow coughs. Colt's words tolled in her mind like iron hammers. Some debts never sleep. Her eyes drifted to the old revolver on the table, firelight glinting off its rusted barrel. It was a trap lying in wait. binding her to secrets she wanted no part of. Yet she recalled his eyes, neither scorn nor contempt. In them had been something else. Recognition, maybe even respect. For the first time, Evelyn wondered if there were still men who could see the worth in mercy, not just sin conjured by whispers. The next morning, as she coaxed the fire and Samuel slept, the hooves returned colt again. This time not only meat, but a small vial of herbs from the town nurse. He set it on the table without explanation. Few drops for the boy. It'll bring the fever down. She held the vial, throat tight. Why help me? Colt crossed his arms, eyes scanning the woods. Because a child carries no blame for grown men's quarrels. And he paused, the faintest twitch of a smile at his lips. Because Widow Mallory asked it of me. I owe her. Evelyn nodded, understanding. This was how men of the West showed kindness. Rough, spare, but unbending as iron. By the third night, Samuel's fever had eased. He slept soundly on the old cot. Evelyn sat at the window, listening to crickets rasp beyond the yard. Far on the hillside, firelight flickered. A group of men, hunters perhaps, or something else. The sight chilled her. Colt's warning and the paper's words returned. Harrington, debt unpaid. Were those men tied to it? Her fear hardened when Colt appeared again the next day, his face set in stone. Somebody in town saw fire out here. If men are hunting for this cabin, it ain't deer they're after. Evelyn swallowed hard. Colt fixed her with a look, accusation and concern bound together. Is there something in this place you haven't told me, Carter? Her lips trembled, but she kept silent. Silence itself was an answer. Colt drew a long breath, then turned toward the door. I don't take kindly to lies, but I won't abandon that child. Be careful. That night, as Evelyn sat by the hearth, Samuel asleep in the crook of her arm, a sound rattled behind the stones. She pulled free another scrap of yellowed paper, brittle with age, as though waiting for her hand. 2 words, scrawled in haste. Blood debt. The firelight jumped, casting the shadows of mother and child against the wall. Evelyn knew now that her life was bound to something far larger than her father's scorn. And the cowboy who had appeared, Colt Harrington, was the link that would draw her into the storm. Colt stood silent in the low cabin, his broad frame blocking nearly half the light spilling through the doorway. His hand held the rusted revolver, eyes fixed on every scratch, every patch of corroded steel. It was no forgotten relic wedged between timbers. To him, it breathed with the ghost of an older story. Evelyn tightened Samuel against her chest. She had never seen Colt's face change like this. Gone was the calmness she had come to know, the faint smile he wore when delivering beef to the townsfolk. In its place lay something taut, burdened, almost crushed beneath memory. This gun, it once belonged to Samuel's mother. The words dropped like a stone into the silence, rippling through the air until Evelyn's heart stumbled in its beat. The Cherokee woman, who had collapsed at her door, who had placed this infant into her arms, had once carried this very weapon? And Colt knew? Her throat caught, the question rising, but his eyes stopped her. They carried no coldness, but something closer to a warning. Some truths could not yet be spoken. He laid the revolver on the table, his fingers brushing its barrel as though touching an old wound. Keep it. There are men out here who don't mean well. A place like this draws eyes. Evelyn's voice quivered. You knew her? Colt did not answer at once. He stepped outside, staring into the thinning woods where the morning wind swept through pine boughs, light scattering across fallen needles. At last he spoke softly, his voice deep with regret and burden. The deeper a thing is buried, the harder it is to escape. That's all I can tell you. Evelyn pressed no further. Samuel whimpered, and she bent to soothe him. But in Colt's gaze she had glimpsed a wall, thick, private, unyielding. That afternoon, Colt stayed to mend the roof. He climbed the rafters, replacing warped boards, hammering nails firm into place. The steady thud of his work echoed through the trees, mingling with the clucks of the hens in the yard. Evelyn carried Samuel outside, rocking him while she watched. There was something in the man's shape, quiet, resolute, that stilled the storm inside her, if only for a moment. When the roof was sound again, Colt sat on the porch, pulling off his gloves, striking a match for a cigarette. He said nothing more about the revolver, but Evelyn saw him glance toward it often, as though guarding a secret only he could bear. That night, Evelyn did not sleep. Samuel lay in a makeshift cradle, and she sat by the table where the gun rested in silence. The oil lamp flickered against the old scrap of paper. Return to Harrington. Debt unpaid. Harrington. Colt's name. Her fingers trembled as she traced the scrawled letters. Did Colt know of this? Was the revolver, the debt, and the child in her arms tangled in one knot too tight to ever loosen? Outside, the wind rattled across the newly fixed roof, its moan like a dirge through the night. Evelyn closed her eyes, whispering the vow she had once spoken over Samuel. You are a blessing, not a burden. But this time her voice shook. By morning, Colt returned. He brought a sack of cornmeal, strips of smoked meat, a packet of coffee. He set them on the table, looked at Samuel and said, The boy needs strength. So do you. Don't refuse. Evelyn nodded, gratitude choking her. But as Colt turned to leave, the question burst from her lips. Why does that gun matter to you so much? Colt paused. The silence stretched so long Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her chest. At last he answered, low, grave, because it once saved a life, and it once took a life. Then he walked out, leaving behind un bombs and air calm too heavy to breathe. Days fell into rhythm. The cabin at the forest's edge became a home of sorts. Samuel grew stronger, his eyes brighter each time they found hers. Evelyn learned to tend chickens, to stoke the fire, to plant a row of potatoes. Yet at night, her gaze strayed always to the revolver on the shelf. The pieces did not yet fit, but all of them turned around one axis. Colt Harrington. One late afternoon, as sunlight drained from the pines, Evelyn carried water from the well. Dust rose thick from the road. A group of riders approached, faces worn, eyes sharp, her chest locked. Colt appeared moments later, as though he had known. He stood on the porch, hand dropping instinctively to his belt where his pistol rested. The riders drew up, their gazes sweeping the cabin, then Evelyn, then stopping on Samuel. Their look chilled her to the marrow. Colt stepped forward, voice steady as iron. There's nothing here for you. Turn your horses. The men laughed low, but after a few curt words, they wheeled away. Evelyn shook, but when she looked at Colt, tall, his shadow stretching long across the dirt, she knew that whatever shadows haunted his past, in this moment he stood between her and danger. That night, Evelyn held Samuel close, staring at the revolver gleaming in the moonlight. She understood then. It was no mere relic of a debt. It was a chain, invisible, binding her, the child, and Colt, together, in ways she dared not yet name. Spring came slow but sure to Wyoming. The last drifts melted, bearing grass so green and tender it seemed winter had never passed. Along the road to Double R Ranch, wagons rattled, horsemen gathered, the whole valley astir. Word of the spring ball had spread through town, the grandest event of the year. Evelyn never imagined she would be asked. An outcast, a branded shame. A woman shut out of her own community, what place could she have at such a gathering? But then Colt appeared, standing in the doorway of her small cabin, setting before her a bundle of wildflowers still jeweled with morning dew. He spoke little, only tipped his hat and said, "If you'll allow, come with me to the ball." Evelyn stood stunned. Samuel slept in the cradle Colt himself had helped fashion from scraps of wood. She looked from her child to the tall cowboy at her door. The heart she thought frozen since the town turned against her stirred like a thawing stream. After a breath of hesitation, she nodded. On the night of the ball, the wide yard of Double R Ranch blazed like a hilltop fire. Lanterns hung high, white and yellow ribbons whipped in the spring wind. The fiddle sang with the drum, boots stamped on timber floors until the sound echoed across the valley. The air smelled of roasted meat, cornbread, whiskey, warmth Evelyn had thought forever lost. Colt came to her side, hand outstretched. "Come on," he said. Evelyn trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of being invited into the crowd as an equal after so long in shadow. Eyes turned, whispers stirred, but Colt's grip was firm, telling her wordlessly that none of it mattered. They danced. At first, Evelyn faltered, her steps unsure, but Colt guided with steady ease, each turn, each step leading her away from judgment into laughter. His laugh rang low and clear, not loud, but strong enough to scatter years of loneliness inside her. To her surprise, she was laughing too, a true sound, not the thin smile she once wore to hide her tears. In the whirl of music, her mind flickered to the past. Those church pews filled with whispers, the slammed doors when she carried Samuel in her arms, and all at once those memories melted away. The man who held her hand did not see disgrace. He saw a woman worthy of respect. When the music ended, Colt led her onto the porch. The spring night breathed cool, scented with fresh grass and smoke from distant fires. He did not release her hand. He only looked into her eyes, eyes that seemed to carry mountains and rivers inside them. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you've lived through enough cold. Now it's time for a different beginning." She did not answer right away. Her heart shook with longing and fear. She had trusted once, only to lose all. Yet his hand was steady, his gaze without judgment, as though he offered a promise that needed no words. That night, Evelyn did not only dance with Colt. She danced with her pain and set it down. In the music, in the strength of his arms, she glimpsed a future, not yet clear, but brighter than anything she had dared to dream. When the ball ended and couples drifted home, Evelyn and Colt remained beneath the moon. Samuel slept peacefully in Mrs. Mallory's arms. She had brought him so Evelyn might be free for one evening. That sight, the child safe, the woman holding his hand, the cowboy standing at her side, etched itself in Evelyn's heart as a turning point. The spring night had given more than a dance. It had given Evelyn the faith that even in a world ruled by prejudice, there was still room for kindness, still space for recognition. And sometimes, the deepest wounds were not endings at all, but the very beginning of a love that was real. The music spun warm beneath the glow of oil lamps, until suddenly it faltered, as though a strange wind had snuffed the flame. Heavy boots struck the wooden floor, each step dragging a rasp that pulled silence down over the crowd. Evelyn turned, and her heart stopped. Her father, Silas Carter, stood in the doorway, shoulders dusted with road grit, his eyes dark as thunderclouds rolling before a storm. Smiles died. The violin screeched into silence. People parted quickly to either side, clearing a path, as if afraid to meet the stern weight of his gaze. Evelyn trembled, her hand clutching Colt's without thought. She knew that look. She had lived her childhood bowed beneath it. The eyes of patriarchal rule, the eyes she had fled. Silas halted at the center of the hall, his voice ringing cold as steel. Evelyn, come home, now. And that child goes to the orphanage. He has no place here. The hall froze. No one breathed too loud. Evelyn's knees weakened, the fragile dream of happiness, just one dance beneath the lanterns, shattered in a breath. Samuel, cradled in Maria's arms near the corner, looked about wide-eyed, sensing the storm even in his innocence. Evelyn tried to speak, but her throat locked. The words broke apart before they formed. Then Colt stepped forward. He set one strong hand on her shoulder, small in motion, but to Evelyn it was a shield between her and the world. His voice carried low and steady, but unyielding. She's not going anywhere. We are engaged. The words cracked like thunder, not only to Silas, but to every ear in the hall. Evelyn's breath caught. Engaged? Colt had thrown a wall around her with a single sentence. Half-truth, lifeline, perhaps both. Was it pity? Protection? Or something else that had been growing quietly between them? She could not tell. All she knew was that she clung to his words like a drowning soul to driftwood. Whispers surged. Women hid their mouths. Men scowled. Children stared wide-eyed. The air thickened, ready to snap. Silas's fists clenched, veins swelling against his skin. His glare bored into Colt as though to devour him. A low-born cowhand thinks he can steal my daughter? You believe that cheap lie changes anything? Colt did not flinch. He met the storm head-on, voice firm as a hammer. It isn't a lie. I'll marry her if need be. But tonight, you won't touch her, or the child. Evelyn's chest tightened. Each word fell like nails into the floor, final, irreversible. Gratitude and fear tangled within her, rising as one. The hall had become kindling, waiting only for a spark, and the spark came, from a stranger who stepped forward from the back. He wore a dark leather coat, hair tied low, his face lined by long roads, his eyes, deep and shadowed, fixed on Samuel as though he were a vision from another time. His voice broke the hush, heavy as a dirge. That child does not belong to anyone in this room. He belongs to the Cherokee. I am his mother's brother. The room rippled with shock. Gasps, murmurs fractured the silence. Evelyn froze, her soul reaching instinctively for Samuel, though the boy remained across the room. Her heart splintered with the sound. Colt stiffened, his eyes darkening. He knew something Evelyn had never been told. A secret woven into the rusted revolver back in the cabin. And now, the past had found them. In a hall filled with music and light, turned suddenly into judgment. Silas narrowed his gaze at the stranger, weighing him. Yet he did not object. In his eyes flickered calculation, the same hunger for control. If the tribe claimed Samuel, perhaps it freed him of the stain on his name. Evelyn reeled. The fragile door she had just stepped through into hope slammed again, ripped away by hands she could not see. She turned to Colt, pleading without words. His face was set, but his eyes held pain. The music was gone. The hall had become a court, where verdicts might strip her of her son and her freedom in the same breath. She could feel Samuel trembling in Maria's arms, the cold rush of fate closing in. And in that moment, she understood. This was no spring dance. This was the storm itself, where love, family, and buried secrets would all be torn open. She clutched Colt's hand, whispered so only he could hear, "Don't let them take him." Colt's nod was small, but his eyes burned. Yet before them stood 3 locked doors, her father, the Cherokee kin, and the shadows of the past. None would open easily. The night over Double R Ranch lay strangely still. After the spring ball unraveled beneath the shadow of Silas Carter and the Cherokee stranger, the whole land seemed drawn taut by an unseen cord. Evelyn sat in the small cabin, Samuel finally asleep after long sobs. Her eyes still glistened, not with despair, but with a fragile light kindled by Colt's courage. He had stood before them all, daring to speak words she herself had never believed she might hear. "We are engaged." The declaration had fallen like a leaf upon water, sending ripples she could not stop. She remembered Colt's eyes as he said it, not only protective, but carrying something deeper. That night, when the guests were gone and the valley lay under wind and shadow, Colt came. He did not knock. He stood beyond the old fence, the sound of his boots soft on the earth. Evelyn stepped out, her heart tightening at the sight of him in moonlight. Steady, solitary, and yet somehow fragile too. "Evelyn." His voice was low, roughened. "I'm sorry for pulling you into the storm tonight. I only wanted to shield you, and Samuel." She bit her lip, hands clutching the hem of her thin coat. "You didn't have to. You owe me nothing." Colt stepped closer, eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't lie. That talk of engagement, it wasn't only for show before your father or the tribe. It's something I've carried for a long time, though I hadn't the nerve to say it." Evelyn stilled. In his gaze she saw a truth so raw it shook her. Then Colt reached into his coat and drew out a small, worn box. Inside lay a silver ring set with a pale pearl. Moonlight touched its surface, soft and proud. "This was my mother's," Colt said quietly, his voice mingling with the wind. "She gave it to me with one charge, that I place it only on the hand of the woman I'd give my life to. Evelyn Carter, I don't want to guard you with a half-truth spoken in a crowded hall. Let me ask it plain. Will you marry me?" Tears welled. From the day she had been cast out, she had never thought anyone would see her this way again. Not as a burden, not as shame, but as a woman worthy of love. Her hand trembled as she reached, not for the ring, but for his hand. Her voice broke, but she whispered through it, "I will." A rare smile touched Colt's face, broad, unhidden, breaking through his usual sternness. He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand closing warm over hers. In that moment, the wind through the pines seemed to soften into song, and the moon bore witness to a vow etched deep. Then, from the shadows, the Cherokee man returned. No longer hardened, his eyes carried weariness and resolve. Evelyn clutched Samuel close, bracing. But instead of strife, he came slowly, opening his palm. Resting there was a slender silver bracelet, etched with tribal patterns. "The boy belongs to my blood." His voice was calm, steady. "But I see in you, and in this man, what blood alone cannot hold. Samuel needs a family, not only a name." He set the bracelet into Evelyn's hand. "It was my sister's, the boy's mother's. Keep it. That way I'll know his fate belongs with you, not the tribe." Evelyn stood frozen, tears flowing anew. She clutched the bracelet tight and nodded. "Thank you. I'll raise him with all I have." The Cherokee man only nodded back, then turned into the night, leaving a silence strangely whole. Colt clasped Evelyn's hand, his voice low but unshaken. "You're not alone anymore. From now on, we're together." Evelyn lifted her gaze to him, and for the first time since her father cast her out, her heart felt full. That night, back inside, she laid Samuel between them, herself on one side, Colt on the other. The child slept sound, the silver bracelet resting nearby. Evelyn knew that whatever storms might come, she would no longer face them in the dark alone. Outside, the forest wind still stirred, but it was no longer the cry of loneliness. It was a hymn of beginnings, of a home, and of a love taking root in the hard soil of the West. The June sun spilled its golden light across the young prairie grass. The summer wind carried the sweet scent of wildflowers, drifting through the small garden behind Double R Ranch, where Evelyn stood before the mirror, trembling as she adjusted the white dress sewn by caring hands. The stitches were not perfect, yet each one held affection, hope, and the belief of the women who had claimed her as family. Samuel babbled in Mrs. Mallory's arms, black curls tumbling over his brow, bright eyes drinking in the bustle with innocent laughter. The boy, once frail in a storm-racked night, was now strong in the embrace of love. Evelyn brushed a kiss across his forehead, whispering, "I promise. Today will be our new beginning." Out in the yard, Colt appeared in a dark suit Maria, the ranch manager's wife, had labored days to fit. He stood tall, shoulders broad and steady as the land itself. In his eyes there was no prideful show, only a quiet conviction that from this day forward he would bear every storm for her. The guests were few but true. The ranch hands, a few families from town, Mrs. Mallory, Maria and her children, and even the Cherokee man who had once claimed Samuel. He stood at the back, solemn, the silver tribal bracelet gleaming beneath the sun. The violin began, plain yet tender. Evelyn stepped from the doorway, her hand shaking, but her eyes bright. Each step down the path strewn with wildflowers brought memories rushing back, being cast out, clutching the child in flight, the nights of despair in a forsaken shack. Now all that pain seemed to dissolve into the wind, leaving peace in its place. As she neared, Colt reached for her, his sun-browned hand warm and sure. Evelyn laid her hand in his, feeling the whole world tilt and steady itself in that single touch. Samuel laughed aloud, reaching for them both, and the crowd burst into smiles. The officiant spoke, not with fine words, but with weight. "From this day, you are no longer two souls alone upon this wild land, but a family. Build together, weather storms together, and guard your light." Colt met Evelyn's gaze and said softly, "I vow that whether darkness or storm, you and Samuel will always have a home." Tears blurred her sight as she answered, her voice breaking, "And I vow never again to let my heart turn away." Applause rose, The cowboys hollered, children flung wildflowers, and the Cherokee man stepped forward, placing the silver bracelet into Samuel's hand. His words came slow and grave. "He carries the blood of two worlds. Let him grow with love, not division." Evelyn bowed her head in gratitude, heart swelling. Behind them, another figure stood silent, Silas Carter. The father, once stern and unyielding, now lingered at the fence, his aged eyes heavy. He did not step in, nor did he disrupt. He only watched as his daughter took the arm of another man, her smile blazing beneath the summer sun. In that moment, he was not the tyrant of her past, but a lonely father who knew he had lost what mattered most. The wedding feast was humble but full. Plates of roasted beef, golden loaves, mugs brimming with cider. Laughter and fiddle songs spilled across the fields. Evelyn sat beside Colt, watching Samuel toddle between caring arms, her spirit lighter than it had ever been. When night fell, the full moon cast its glow over Double R Ranch. Evelyn leaned against the porch of her new home, the summer wind brushing her cheek. Colt came close, his arm firm around her waist, whispering, "From today on, you'll never have to run again." Evelyn lifted her tear-streaked face to smile at him. In the moonlight, his features were clear, not the proud visage of a cowboy, but the steady face of a man who had chosen love over judgment, who had chosen to hold on rather than to cast away. And the summer wind bore their vows across the prairie, as though etching them into the western sky. That from this day, amid every storm, a new family had been born. After the cheers faded and the fiddles fell quiet, Double R Ranch sank into the tender hush of a summer night. The wind from the hayfields carried the raw scent of earth mixed with the sweetness of wildflowers. Evelyn sat beneath the porch roof, her wedding dress now dusted with prairie grit, yet to her eyes it still blazed like a flame. Her father, Silas Carter, stood there, rigid yet adrift, a figure stranded when the crowd had gone. He looked upon his daughter, no longer with the iron gaze of command, but as though facing something beyond his reach. From his coat, he drew a worn handkerchief, frayed at the edges, its once white cloth yellowed with years. His voice came hoarse as if carried by the prairie wind. "Your mother was forced to wed." She bore it in silence, never raised her voice, believing it the lot of a woman. "But you, Evelyn, you are stronger than she ever was." I cannot deny that." Evelyn received the handkerchief, a tide of tangled feeling rising within her. For the first time, she heard her father admit it, not as the tyrant who bound her life with duty and name, but as a man stripped bare, who had lost too much. She smiled softly, nodding. "I only did what Mother never had the chance to do. And for Samuel's sake, I had to learn to stand." Silas's eyes flickered with pain, then gentled. He gripped her shoulder with calloused hands, the gesture a late acceptance, an apology too frail for words. Across the yard came Samuel's bright laughter. The boy sat astride a young horse, tiny arms wrapped around Colt's waist. The cowboy held the reins steady, guiding slow steps so the child could feel the strength beneath him. "Look there," Silas murmured. "The boy. He has the bearing of a Carter." Evelyn's smile widened, her gaze never leaving the scene. "No, father. He is his own. A child born for freedom." Silas said nothing. He knew he had no ground left to contest. The man who once sought to divide them now could only watch, admitting in silence that Evelyn's life had broken free of his design. The horizon burned with dusk, streaks of fire stretching across the prairie. Summer wind lifted Colt's hair, casting glints of light upon Samuel's ringing laughter. Evelyn cradled a newborn girl in her arms, their second child come months after the wedding. The infant's breath warmed her chest, trembling against her dress. Tiny hands stretched outward, seeking an anchor. Evelyn pressed a kiss to her daughter's brow, the truth swelling in her heart. Family is not written in bloodlines, but in love, and the courage to defend it. That night, when the ranch had gone quiet, Evelyn lingered by the window, moonlight spilling across the fields. Her mother's handkerchief lay in her lap, light as breath. And she saw, for a fleeting instant, the thin figure of the woman long gone, eyes shadowed with sorrow, hands calloused yet always tender for her child. Evelyn realized her mother's legacy was not submission, but the strength for a daughter to claim her freedom. She turned. Colt was there, Samuel perched on his shoulders, their baby girl sleeping peacefully in the cradle. Moonlight traced his face, strong yet softened by care. Evelyn slipped her arms around him from behind. Colt caught her hand. No word spoken, but in the silence their hearts beat the same. "Colt," she whispered, "we've come a long way, haven't we?" His eyes deepened. "We still have a whole life ahead, Evelyn, and I'll never let you face it alone again." The summer wind rose outside, sweeping scents of fresh grass and distant dust. Yet within the little house there was only peace. Silas left the ranch in silence without farewell. But Evelyn knew that silence was his final admission. He had seen the strength in his daughter, a strength forged of love, of a child once thought a burden but proved a blessing, of a cowboy who chose to stand between her and every storm. And as the full moon crowned the sky, Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed a vow. This family would endure, would love, would survive, not for honor or blood, but for the belief that destiny holds meaning only when you seize it with your own two hands. Perhaps in truth, each of us carries a Samuel in our lives, a fragile gift we once chose to hold fast, despite storms and judgment. And it is in that moment of choice that the rest of our lives is written. If this tale stirs a memory or a belief in you, share your thoughts. Have you witnessed a love that stood unbroken against prejudice? Have you discovered that the truest strength of family lies not in name, but in heart? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, so the fire of these Wild West love echoes may burn on, a reminder that love and courage never grow old.